The invitation was delivered with a calm smile, while his eyes stated, very clearly, that no feeble excuse would suffice to deflect him. Nerves a-quiver, Sophie surrendered to the inevitable with a suffocatingly gracious inclination of her head. Her determinedly calm composure very nearly cracked when he swept her onto the floor. His arm about her felt like iron. There was such strength in him it would be frightening if it was not so deliberately contained. He whirled her down the floor. She felt like thistledown, lighter than air, anchored to reality only by his solidity and the warm clasp of his hand. She had never waltzed like this before, processing without conscious thought, her feet naturally following his lead, barely touching the floor. As her senses, stirred by his touch, gradually settled, she glanced up. "You dance very well, Mr. Lester." His eyes glinted down at her from under heavy lids. "I've had lots of practice, my dear." His meaning was very clear. She should have blushed and looked away. Instead, Sophie found enough courage to smile serenely before letting her gaze slide from his. Aware of the dangerous currents about her, she made no further attempt to converse. For his part, Jack was content to remain silent. He had learned all he needed to know. Freed of the burden of polite conversation, his mind could dwell on the pleasure of having her, at long last, in his arms. She fitted perfectly, neither too tall nor, thankfully, too short. If she were closer, her curls would tickle his nose, her forehead level with his chin. She was not completely relaxed. He could not expect that. Yet she was content enough in his arms. The temptation to tighten his hold, to draw her closer, was very real, yet he resisted. Too many eyes were upon them, and she did not yet know she was his. The last chord sounded. He whirled them to a flourishing halt. He looked down, smiling as he drew her hand through his arm. "I will return you to your aunt, Miss Winterton." Sophie blinked up at him. Could he hear her heart thudding? "Thank you, sir." Retreating behind a mask of cool formality, she allowed him to lead her back to the chaise. However, instead of leaving her by her aunt's side, her partner merely nodded at Lucilla, then led her to where her circle of acquaintances was once again forming. Larger than life, he stood beside her, acknowledging her introductions with a coolly superior air which, she suspected, was innate. Feeling her nerves stretch and flicker, Sophie glanced up as the musicians once more laid bow to string. His eyes met hers. Suddenly breathless, Sophie looked away. Her gaze fell on Lady Asfordby, bustling up. "Glad to see, Lester, that you're not one of those London dandies who think they're above dancing in country ballrooms." Stifling a resigned sigh, Jack turned to his hostess, an amiable smile on his lips. Her ladyship's gimlet gaze swept the assembled company, fixing on a bright-faced young lady. "Dare say Miss Elderbridge will be pleased to do you the honour." Thus adjured, Jack bent a practised smile on Miss Elderbridge, who assured him, somewhat breathlessly, that she would be delighted to partner him in the country dance about to begin. Hearing a murmur to his left, Jack glanced back to see Sophie place her hand on another gentleman's sleeve. They were both poised to move away, their partners by their sides. Jack grasped the moment, trapping Sophie's gaze in his, lowering his voice to say, "Until next we meet, Miss Winterton." Sophie felt her eyes widen. Lowering her lashes, she inclined her head. As she moved to her place in the set, she felt his words reverberate deep within her. Her heart thudded. It was an effort to concentrate on Mr. Simpkin's conversation. There had been a wealth of meaning hidden in Jack Lester's subtle farewell, and she had no idea whether he meant it or not.